Speaker and City Council to immediately pass the How Many Stops Act and for the mayor to sign both bills into law. I'm Sinead Bishop, the How Many Stops Act organizer for Justice Committee. Justice Committee is a grassroots organization that works with families who've lost loved ones to police and survivors of police violence. We're a founding organization of Communities United for Police Reform. Communities United for Police Reform is a coalition of organizations led by and accountable to NYC communities that for decades have borne the brunt of NYPD's racist and abusive policing. We're here today to demand that our elected officials take concrete action towards ending police violence and ensuring true community safety by passing the How Many Stops Act to require reporting on all NYPD street stops, investigative encounters, and consent searches. The How Many Stops Act consists of two common-sense good government bills that will bring critical and urgent oversight and transparency to the vast majority of NYPD interactions with the public. The first one is Intro 586. It'll require NYPD to report on all level 1 and 2 stops and investigative encounters, including where they happened, demographic information on the person stopped, and the reason for the encounter, and whether the encounter leads to any use of force or enforcement action. Intro 538 will require the NYPD to fully report on their use of so-called consent searches, searches in which a police officer need not suspect any wrongdoing to search a person or the belongings if the person gives permission. The data collected on these so-called lower-level stops via the two bills is crucial for completing the picture of what policing really looks like in New York City so that we can work together in NYPD profiling and abuse and ensure real safety for New Yorkers. A decade after the NYPD's abuse of stop and frisk was found unconstitutional by federal court, the department is still unlawfully stopping, searching, and humiliating people, particularly men of color, according to the latest report by the NYPD's Federal Monitor. As Justice Committee members know all too well, unconstitutional and racially motivated stops are on the rise since Mayor Adams took office. In this context, passing the How Many Stops Act is more urgent than ever. I'll pass it to my co-MC now, Sama, who's...
Thank you so much, Sheree. Hi everyone, my name is Sama Sisay. I'm an attorney with the Center for Constitutional Rights. CCR is a proud steering committee member of CPR, Communities United for Police Reform. And I'm here today, thank you so much, Sheree, for really laying out the bills, but I'm really here to set the context for us to how we got here today. So in August of 2013, so 10 years ago, a federal judge found that the NYPD was unconstitutionally and racially profiling and stopping Black and Latinx men mainly in the city, right? So this was after a long trial, after a lot of organizing by people who are here today, after a lot of effort in the city to try and get transparency and to remedy harms that had been done for years in the city. We had to sue them. So CCR and a lot of other organizations took the city to court and we sued them because of their stop and frisk practices. And in August 2013, a federal judge said, you're violating the Constitution and this needs to stop. And they were placed under federal monitorship. It's 10 years later and this monitorship is still ongoing and the NYPD is still not in compliance, meaning that they continue to unconstitutionally stop Black and brown New Yorkers. They continue to racially profile individuals, and we're here to say that's not okay. These bills are common sense transparency bills that are just trying to get the department to do reporting, to report on every encounter that they're having because we know that abuse continues. Like Sheree mentioned, the Federal Monitor released a report in June. And in this report, they did an investigation into a new unit within the NYPD called the Neighborhood Safety Teams. So the Neighborhood Safety Teams are just a rebranding of teams that have existed in the past, street crime, right? And all of these units that used to be plain clothes, and now as Neighborhood Safety Team, they have to have some type of uniform or something that they have on. However, during this investigation, what the Federal Monitor found is that unconstitutional stops are continuing under the Neighborhood Safety Teams. In fact, the Neighborhood Safety Teams numbers are worse than the rest of the department. And these are supposed to be officers who are specially trained, who are specially supervised, right? and their numbers are really, really terrible. In fact, 97% of all individuals who were stopped by the neighborhood safety team were Black or Latinx. And so we see this racial discrimination continuing. That is unacceptable. And even though these bills are plain transparency reporting bills, the NYPD continues to push back against this type of reporting. Why, right? We're asking for transparency. It will not be burdensome. That's what they're claiming, right? It will be burdensome if officers have to report on all types of encounters that they're having with individuals on the street. It will not. We know how this process works. Officers use an app on their phone that they put this information into. Furthermore, this has been something that has been recommended for years. After the trial in the Floyd versus City of New York case that found the NYPD was engaging in unconstitutional stop and frisk, there was a whole process called the joint remedial process that happened. And from that process, a judge and the facilitator, Judge Belen, released recommendations as to what needs to be done in order for the NYPD to come into compliance with the court order. And one of the recommendations that the judge made was that there needs to be reporting of level 1 and level 2 encounters, which are what are considered lower level encounters, right? That are not considered full stops. But we know from the experience from talking to people who are impacted by this, that being stopped, any stop by an NYPD officer can always escalate and it can always lead to harm. And so we need accountability, we need transparency, and we need reporting. The How Many Stop Act has broad support from New Yorkers, elected officials, advocates, community groups across the city. The speaker has said that the How Many Stops Act is a top priority. The bills are endorsed by both the Black, Latino, Asian Caucus and the Progressive Caucus. Dozens of organizations across the city and 26 family members of New Yorkers killed by the NYPD. It is co-sponsored by more than a majority of council members. There is no reason to further delay the passage of this important legislation. And so that's why we're here today, because this is a priority, it has the support, and it needs to be passed. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker today is Hawa Ba, mother of Muhammad Ba, who was killed by the NYPD in 2012. Ms. Ba is one of 26 family members of New Yorkers killed by the NYPD who sent a letter to the speaker about this issue. Thank you for being here, Ms. Ba.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Hawa Ba. I'm the mother of Mohammed Ba. Mohammed Ba was killed by the NYPD on September 25, 2012. Since then, I have fight for justice for my son and to completely remove NYPD from the mental health response. Mohammed Ba was a hard worker, an honest student, taxi driver. He was my pride and joy. Mohammed Ba was in mental health distress. He needed a medical attention. I called a 911 to get in an ambulance, but the NYPD showed up first, forced the way into his door, even though I begged them to not go. Shoot him 8 times and kill him execution style, then lie about what happened. I am here today on behalf of dozens of families who have lost a loved one in the NYPD to say we need Harmony Stop Act to pass now. If those bill does not pass, it will protect and affirm the officers those kill my son. Last week, me and 25 other families sent a letter to the speaker, city controller, about the mayor, about Permanent Staff Act. We want the letter. We send the letter because we do not want to see more families suffer. And Permanent Staff Act is easier to stop to need order in order. In order to change the family have benefit. Since our loved one was killed, today the CAP are harassing our community, more community member more and more. We cannot afford wait any longer. The families are calling the speaker and city controller to pass Permanent Staff Act on September 14. We call on the mayor to stop NYPD abusing immediately and sign the bill into law. We cannot wait no more longer this bill to pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bond. All right, now we're going to bring up the two co-sponsors of Intro 586, the bill to make sure that there's reporting on level 1 and 2 stops and investigative encounters. We're going to bring up Alexa Aviles. If I said it wrong, let me know. And Jumani Williams.
That's beauty before age. Hello everyone. Good morning. My name is Councilmember Alexa Aviles, and I represent District 38, and representing the neighborhoods of Sunset Park, Red Hook, Brooklyn. And I'm very happy to be here and proud to be a co-lead sponsor on Intro 586, known as How Many Stops Act, along with our public advocate, Jumani Williams. So legislators are at their best when bills we author are driven by community voices. I want to express my admiration for Communities United for Police Reform and their many, many coalition partners, and the countless numbers of families and victims of police violence who have held us to account and who have done the hard work of organizing us to this very moment. Thank you. Intro 586 won't bring us back our neighbors that we have lost to police violence. If enacted, Intro 586 would shed light on the demographics of residents profiled during low-level encounters. It is something that thousands of New Yorkers have asked for, and I'd say for decades. They have asked for this information. It's just a small part of the accountability that New Yorkers deserve. Reporting this information would potentially only require the push of a few buttons. Similar kinds of tagging during reviews of body cam footage is already a regular practice in the department. This is not a radical notion. Do you know what this is? The NYPD Anti-Crime Unit's rampant violations of civil rights of Black and brown New Yorkers is the dog whistle name of public safety. On the available data on stops this unit conducts, we get a glimpse of the kinds of systemic racial profiling that goes on. Of the 15,000 stops that occurred in 22, 59% were targeted Black residents, when they make up just 25% of the population. I have heard some argue that the NYPD overtime budget is hemorrhaging money, and it is. And to add another step in the process would be undue burden, further exacerbating this issue. To those, I suggest that they look at the widespread reporting on rampant abuses of overtime within our city's police force already. Officers already have plenty of excuses for overtime. This is a straw man argument. This will not lead to the other thing. The accountability that we are asking for is not radical. The transparency that we are asking for is not radical. For families and victims of generations of Black and brown New Yorkers to come, let's pass How Many Stops Act, because what do we want? Justice. What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now. What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now. We are asking for transparency and accountability in a system that is already built. Not additional things. We're not asking for whistles and tricks and magic. We are asking for something that can be done. This can be done because it's a system that's being used already. Thank you so much.
Peace and blessing, love and light, everyone. My name is Jemani Williams, and I'm a public advocate of the city of New York. Transparency and accountability. When it comes to transparency and accountability, law enforcement has never worked well with others. Period. They just don't. And so anything that you're hearing now is not new. We heard it before, and we hear it again. When it comes to transparency and accountability and law enforcement, that conversation always has to be forced. I wish it didn't. I wish people would genuinely come to the table and have a conversation, but they don't, and they won't. So we have to do lawsuits, and we have to pass bills, and they're always against the lawsuits and always against the bills. So we heard this information, we heard this same pushback 10 years ago when we passed the Community Safety Act to deal with the abuses of stop, question, and frisk. By the way, when we were saying how bad it was, we were told that we just love criminals. We would not have been able to prove what we knew if we didn't have the data. And we had the data because they were forced to now give it to us. And so it wasn't true what they said about the Community Safety Act, and it's not true what they're saying now. What it is true is the community is usually Black and brown who are dealing with violence and issues around violence now. We're dealing with it 10 years ago and 10 years prior, and each time what we've tried to do is send law enforcement to a community only instead of trying to deal with the underlying impacts of what's causing that violence to begin with. And that has never worked, and it won't work now. So we are trying to make sure that when we're dealing with law enforcement, we have the information to make sure that we have a transparent and accountable law enforcement. We also know, regardless of what is said, there's bias-based policing in policing and in law enforcement, period. I wish we didn't have to pass these, but we do, and we will.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
we will.
yes, we will.
My hope is that after this, we get even more council members signed on, and we move swiftly to pass this, because we need it, and we know we need it. And what they're saying again, media, I want you to look into it. It is not a burden. Law enforcement already has to make reports on the activity that they do. They already have to look at their footage for activity that they do. Even if for activity, if they're looking for a missing person, which is the example they always use. At most, this is an extra drop down that they have to click. That's the maximum that they would have to do on their phones or on their computers. Judge Ariel Barron has already said this is not a big administrative burden. What this is law enforcement doing what they do, not wanting more accountability and not wanting transparency. Those are the two buckets. Whenever we have improvement around law enforcement, those two buckets are the ones that never get the type of improvement that we need. And on behalf of my newborn baby, who's not a toddler right now, on behalf of my 15-year-old, I'm going to continue to make sure we have a New York City that is better for them than the one I grew up in. And these bills are part of that. Let's get it done. Let's know that law enforcement is going to misinform what these bills do, but let's know it is better for all New Yorkers to be safe, especially the ones that are dealing with the issues in the black and brown community that they've been dealing with for a very long time. Peace and blessings. Love and light to you all.
Thank you to both of our Intro 586 lead sponsors for championing transparency, accountability, and community safety. We also want to say a huge thank you to Councilmember Crystal Hudson, the lead sponsor on Intro 538, which is the consent search portion of the How Many Stops Act. Councilmember Hudson is on parental leave and can't be with us today. Councilmember Hudson introduced 538, the second bill of the How Many Stop Act, as a through her relationship with Borough President Antonio Reynoso, who as a council member was a lead sponsor on the Right to Know Act, Communities United for Police Reform's package of legislation that the How Many Stop Act builds upon. So our next speaker is Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso.
All right.
Good morning still, I believe, or afternoon, whatever it is. I'm so happy to be here. I want to thank co-sponsors, our public advocate, Jamani Williams, and Councilmember Alexa Aviles for this great work. What I want to talk about is the inevitability of the information that folks are going to get from other people against this. There's this sky is falling mentality that comes with every time we try to pass a bill related to police accountability. Now, in no time was it worse than when the CSA was passed by then Councilmember Jamani Williams and Councilmember Brad Lander. The CSA passed, and the idea was that crime would skyrocket and we would return to the 2,300 murders that existed in the 1990s. And that was what's going to happen. Pre-Giuliani era policing, a crime that was going to happen because of the legislation. The legislation passes, and we go through the next 4 years having the lowest crime ever recorded in the city of New York. So after the most dangerous piece of legislation that was going to be passed, we have the safest time in the city of New York, which is constantly what happens when we increase accountability. Then we pass the legislation, the Right to Know Act. We passed the Right to Know Act, and again, folks flare up and talk about how the sky is going to fall, and we're going to again see increase in crime. It doesn't happen. We see more reduction in crime after we pass the two most meaningfully accountable pieces of legislation for the NYPD. Crime goes down. There's an uptick in crime across this country and across this world during COVID. Across it. Not because of the accountability work that we were doing, because we proved through about 10 years of accountability acts a reduction in crime. And now what we're saying is we got more work to do. We got more work to do because accountability is not a bad thing. And that is what this is doing. This is allowing us to get information that you can use against us if it's bad. The cops are perfect, then let them show it on paper. That is all we're asking is for more data. And this legislation will do that job. So I'm grateful again to Councilmember Crystal Hudson for taking on this cleanup of the bill that we passed about 4 years ago when we were council members. So thank you all, and don't forget to spread love. It's the Brooklyn way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brooklyn Borough President Reynoso. And thanks for your support of the How Many Stops Act and for your long track record of advancing police transparency and accountability and community safety. Our next speaker is Juan Collins from Vocal Leadership.
Good afternoon. My name is Juan Collins, and I'm a vocal civil rights union leader. And I'm also formerly incarcerated. And I've seen firsthand how the NYPD police encounters can be. I was arrested in 2007 when I first saw stop and frisk at work. I was in a TNT van, and they was going around on 97th and Broadway conducting other law enforcement, as they say. But what the law enforcement that they said they was conducting was jumping out of the vans, out on black and brown people, putting up against the wall, conducting searches, right, without any probable cause, not finding anything in a lot of the cases, and letting them go. They would search through their clothing and pockets, and if they didn't find anything, they would just walk away like nothing ever happened. Someone was in possession of drug paraphernalia, they were hauled in, which most of the cases were low-level offenses. It was a catch and release. It was catch and release, and these violations happen oftentimes. To remedy the widespread of the constitutional violations, the judge back in 2013 ordered a court-appointed monitor to oversee a series of reforms to the NYPD policy and practices, and also ordered a joint remedial process which would solicit input from a variety of stakeholders, including New York communities mostly directly affected by policy. That was 10 years and 11 days ago since that court's decision. And since then, there has been a significant uptick that we're seeing under the Adams administration. Stops have increased by 70%. And with Mayor Adams' police-first approach to public safety, we all should be demanding to know exactly how NYPD is showing up in our communities. Some of the work that we do at Vocal is centered around reducing the size, scope, and power of the NYPD. Because we all know that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we have seen that power operating within our own police system here in New York, within the NYPD. And that power has caused and continues to cause harm to black and brown people. Because we know that the safest communities aren't the ones with the most police, it's the ones with the most resources. The How Many Stop Act is an important part of that goal. Police transparency is an essential measure for holding the NYPD accountable for discriminatory and abusive policing practices that criminalize and harm New Yorkers, and particularly black and Latino communities, which make New Yorkers less safe. These bills are calling for the bare minimum, transparency. There is no legitimate argument against a full picture of NYPD encounters. Some might say that these are low-level encounters, so what's the big deal? But time and time again, we see how those encounters can escalate. What we see the NYPD fabricating evidence, reports, and testifying, as this has happened in my own case, in my own criminal cases. We've seen those encounters end with the death of our loved ones, and an agency that can exercise that kind of power must be subjected to the same degree of transparency and oversight and accountability. Let's get these bills passed now. Thank you.
Thank you for your words and your leadership, Dawn. Our next speaker is Michael Szyczki, Assistant Policy Director for the New York Civil Liberties Union. Okay. All right. We're moving right along. Thank you, Michael, for everything that you do with the coalition. We really appreciate you. The How Many Stop Act already has broad support from a broad base of New Yorkers, 26 families who've lost loved ones to the NYPD, dozens of organizations and more than the majority of the City Council. Both the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus and Progressive Caucus have endorsed both intros 586 and 538. Our next speaker is Councilmember De La Rosa, Vice Co-Chair of the Progressive Caucus, who will share a joint statement from the BLAC and Progressive Caucus along with her comments.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to read a statement from the BLAC and the Progressive Caucus, but before I do that, let me just say that I represent District 10, Washington Heights, Inwood, and Marble Hill in Upper Manhattan. And I often say when talking about criminal justice that my community has been at the direct crosshairs of over-policing, the war on drugs, and mass incarceration. There is a direct link between the harm that we've seen in our communities, mass incarceration, and lack of accountability in the NYPD. I also stand with the families who have lost their loved ones, and they will never get them back at the hands of police violence. So with that, I will say that the New York City Council Black, Latino, Asian Caucus and the Progressive Caucus call for swift action on intros 538 and 586, commonly referred to as the How Many Stops Act. We are proud to stand with the 26 family members of New Yorkers killed by the NYPD and dozens of community organizations, unions, and legal and advocacy groups, and join them in calling for the immediate passage of these bills. The How Many Stops Act is a common sense legislation that will ensure transparency of the New York City Police Department. Most common activities in our districts, many of which are disproportionately targeted and heavy-handed, racially motivated policing. In the age of smartphones, this kind of reporting is simple and doable and can be completed in a matter of seconds by the officers. With unconstitutional stops on the rise, as reported by the Federal Monitor for the NYPD, we cannot wait any longer to take action on this important step forward. The How Many Stops Act is in line with the progressive values and will give the City Council the data that we need to ensure that we serve our communities by providing oversight and advancing reforms to ensure police accountability and community safety. So both the Black, Latino, Asian Caucus and the Progressive Caucus stand aligned on this priority. We are the majority in the City Council. The majority in the City Council looks like people of color, and we reflect the pain and harm that has been caused in our communities. We will not stop until we see these acts passed. And I also have to take a point of privilege to thank Public Advocate Jumaane Williams, to thank Antonio Reynoso. They were the council before us, a decade plus fighting to reverse those harms. Alexa Aviles, who is a luchadora for our communities, and our sister Crystal Hudson. Thank you for your
Thank you so much, Councilmember De La Rosa. Our next speaker is Carmen Perez, the CEO of the Gathering for Justice. Yeah, Carmen!
Good afternoon. I want to start by expressing my deep gratitude to CPR for orchestrating today's rally. To everyone gathered here, thank you for your commitment to justice. Public Advocate Jumaane Williams, Council members Alexis Aviles, Carmen De La Rosa, and Crystal Hudson, thank you for your leadership. My name is Carmen Perez Jordan. I am the President and CEO of the Gathering for Justice and stand here as a co-founder of Justice League NYC. Today we rally with a clear purpose to demand our representatives act to curtail police violence and guarantee genuine community safety. We must champion the immediate passage of the How Many Stops Act, a beacon for accountability and transparency within the NYPD. History has repeatedly shown us the devastating outcomes of unchecked police stops. We've grieved far too many lives lost, especially within our Black and brown communities. The How Many Stops Act is more than just a piece of legislation. It's a clarion call for a comprehensive understanding of NYPD's activities. We cannot accept superficial reforms any longer. To truly eliminate violence and systemic prejudice in policing, we must take courageous strides towards radical change. Accurate data collection is the bedrock of accountability. To truly understand the reality of policing in New York City, it's imperative that we have a complete, unfiltered view. And this data just isn't about numbers. It's about lives, stories, and our communities. As a Chicana, this battle hits close to home. And so I'm actively spearheading an initiative that aims to bridge a vital data gap. Understanding the extent to which American Latinos are affected by police violence. This endeavor seeks to curate a database that includes ethnicity of police victims, zeroing in on the pressing need to correctly represent Latinx victims who are often shadowed or misclassified in official reports. Transparent insights into the actions of NYPD officers are foundational for fostering genuine community safety. The How Many Stops Act pledges to ensure every interaction is documented and made public. Let's urge the City Council to heed this call and act promptly. Our communities cannot wait. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Our next speaker is Sister Rivera, Policy Council for Bronx Defenders. Woo!
Hi
Rivera. I'm a staff attorney and policy counsel at the Bronx Defenders, and I'm here to just give you some insight from a public defender's perspective. So as attorneys, we watch hundreds of hours of body-worn camera as well as surveillance video of our clients' interactions with the NYPD. And we regularly challenge these same stops and encounters in court. Not only will these bills help us enhance our ability to make these challenges, but they're also going to give New Yorkers the transparency that they deserve. We cannot continue to ignore the disturbing and historically tragic relationship that exists between the NYPD and the community here. All we can do is learn from it, but we cannot learn unless we have the data. Unfortunately, this is nothing new. Data has always played a major role when it comes to giving us a true picture of what's actually going on here between the NYPD and our community. We can't forget about the Knapp Commission report from 1971, or the Mullen Commission report from 1994, or NICLU and other organizations' report from 2012 that played such an integral role in the stop and frisk litigation. What we're seeing is that these reports and the data contained within those reports actually expose so much more about the NYPD than we thought, right? Dating back to the 70s, it exposed the police brutality, the torture, the extortion. It exposed the racially biased police practices that continue to exist today. And that's because of the data. Data has always been one of the most effective tools to providing us the full picture of what's actually taking place. And I wish the data that we have access to right now is enough, but it's not. And the fact that we're even here, and the fact that these trends continue to exist despite the fact that the federal government has stepped in, is just an embarrassment at this point. What the NYPD and others fail to realize is that this isn't just about numbers or paperwork. We are talking about police interactions that have led to the loss of life and have caused lifelong trauma in the individuals' lives as well as their families. And that's why we're demanding the transparency, because this data will help us understand the interactions that have the capacity to cause so much harm. Just this past summer, my coworker and I were standing outside of our office in the South Bronx when we saw an officer pull up to a young black boy. He was doing nothing but walking, but because it's a young black boy in the Bronx, he is a target. He was immediately questioned. He was immediately asked to have his bag searched, and this officer, the young boy, put his hands up and said, "Sure." The officer continued to rummage through his bag, and that's when my coworker and I started to walk across the street. But what did this officer do? He quickly zipped up this kid's bag, told him he's free to go, and jumped into his car before we even had a chance to get across the street. This happens every day, and these interactions are the ones we don't see, right? It's not enough just to fight these things in court, because these are the ones that are going under the radar. And this act is going to help ensure that does not happen anymore. And so this is the reality of it. The targets of these stops are overwhelmingly black and brown, and they're overwhelmingly poor, and we have to recognize the reality of this. And so that's why us, CPR, the Bronx Defenders, are calling for the How Many Stops Act to be passed now.
Yes. Thank you so much, Christine. Our final speaker is Teron Bell, lead plaintiff of Bell versus City of New York, represented by the Legal Aid Society.
Hi, afternoon. My name is Teron Bell. Several years ago, I was illegally stopped and frisked by the NYPD. I sued them, and my case made international news and got the NYPD to change their rules on warrant checks and during stop and frisk. When I sued the cops, I found out my stop was not counted in the NYPD's official stop and frisk database because a lot of cops are reporting stops. But all stops should be counted, which is why the New York City Council should immediately pass the act on the How Many Stops Act. When I was stopped, four NYPD officers surrounded me, ordered me to turn around, put my hands up, searched me, and demanded my ID to run a warrant check. When I asked why, they said they were looking for guns. I was a black man in my early 20s living in Harlem, so the police automatically treated me like a suspect. We all seen what can happen when things like this can go wrong, so I complied with the officers. When they didn't find anything, they let me go. The stop lasted less than 15 minutes, but it actually with me on ever since. Put yourself in my shoes for a minute. Have you ever been going about your business 1 minute and then 4 armed guys jump out of a car and surround you the next minute? Getting stopped by the police can be a terrifying experience, and it should never be taken lightly. I don't know why the cops did not report my stop. Maybe it's because they claimed it's a low-level stop, so they did not have to report it. But to me, it was not a low-level stop. The New York City Council has the power to make these stops, to make sure these stops are counted by passing the How Many Stops Act. Thank you.
Can we have safety without accountability? No. Can we have accountability without transparency? No. Repeat after me. Full transparency. Full transparency is what we need. Is what we need. How many stops at? How many stops at? It must succeed. It must succeed. Louder. Full transparency. Full transparency is what we need. Is what we need. How many stops at? How many stops at? It must succeed. It must succeed.
Before I take the Q&A, I want to thank the groups who turned out today. Thank y'all a little bit. 1199 NCIU. Center for Police and Equality. Justice Committee. CRITAL. Latino Justice. Legal Aid Society. NAACP Legal Defense Fund. New York Anti-Violence Project. New York Civil Liberties Union. Bronx Defenders. Gathering for Justice, and Vocal. I also want to thank all the organizations that have endorsed the How Many Stops Act. Our lead sponsors, all the council members who co-sponsored both bills, and the Black Latino Asian Caucus and Progressive Caucus for endorsing both bills of the How Many Stops Act.
As all of our speakers have shown today, our communities can't wait any longer, right? There is no reason for delay. The How Many Stop Act has the support, it has the community support, it has support from the council, and it needs to be passed. That's why we're here today. We're saying no more delay, no more delay. This has been ongoing for years. 10 years ago, the federal government stepped in. And 10 years later, we're here today and we're still asking for the same thing, which is for the NYPD to be accountable to the community it claims to serve, and for transparency in all encounters and stops with New Yorkers. That's all we're asking for. These are common sense transparency bills that need to be passed. There is no reason for a delay. We are calling on all council members who have not yet co-sponsored intros 586 and 538 to do so without delay. We are calling on the Speaker and the City Council to pass the How Many Stops Act at the September 14th stated meeting, and for the Mayor to then immediately sign both bills into law. That's our demand. That's why we're here today. Thank you all for being with us. Before we start taking questions, I want to invite Michael Shajiski from the New York Civil Liberty Union and then all the other speakers to come up so we're able to answer any questions that press have. Thank you all.
Yeah, I want to know, like, how will y'all take the blowback for the Common Sense Caucus, like Bob Holden's, like how do y'all answer to their criticism to the bill, the Common Sense Caucus?
I think Borough President Reynoso said it best earlier. We've heard these calls before, these concerns before, that when the council passes something on police transparency and accountability, the sky will fall. And history shows that those concerns have always been proven wrong. These are common sense transparency bills. They will improve transparency, they will improve accountability, and they will give New Yorkers the tools that we need, the basic transparency to know what our investment in policing is actually translating to in terms of encounters in communities.
Jake.
Do you know how many stops have occurred this year?
Right now we have data on level 3 stops, the reasonable suspicion stops that the NYPD is carrying out. We know that those are undercounts, as the federal monitor has repeatedly found. We know that stops have still increased, though, under the Adams administration because of their commitment to broken windows policing, to more low-level enforcement and interactions. But we don't know the full number of encounters that are happening because of those undercounts and because of the fact that we don't have this data on level 1 and level 2 encounters. There's an entire universe of encounters that are taking place in communities that are going unreported and unreported that these bills will fill in those gaps?
Any other questions from the press?
So I mean, the bills really focus on the encounters themselves, but I think, as Christine was talking about in terms of folks being arrested, I'm not exactly sure, but the purpose of the bills for the consent search and then also for the lower levels, level 1 and level 2, is just reporting by officers during these encounters. So the information being asked is sort of like where people are being stopped, race, demographic information, and things like that. And the hope is that once we collect this information, we have a better understanding of or what officers are doing in order to hold them accountable. So I don't have a full answer to your question in terms of what happens once people are arrested or committed. The bills don't touch on that, but our hope is that through these bills, there is better transparency at that very beginning of that encounter when folks are actually stopped.
I will say that there are a number of bills that have been recently introduced around not only the homeless sweeps but also the involuntary. So we can get to the information on those bills because they're separate.
And I think what the data is going to help us see is if there are any problematic trends, right? If they're targeting certain people, certain